Veteran experience and elite guard play win in March, and that's why Gonzaga can absolutely extend their Sweet 16 streak.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. Overview for today's show, we're going to discuss 4 reasons why the Zags can extend their Sweet 16 streak, why we believe they are capable of making a deep run in March. We're also going to talk about 4 things they need to work on, 4 things that could very easily trip them up, not only before the Sweet 16, but potentially in this first game against Georgia on Thursday afternoon. Plus, we close out the show talking about the Lady Zags, who are joining the WBIT. They will host UTSA on Thursday at the Kennel. We'll talk about that. Some WCC teams in the NIT, all that to close out the show. But let's start taking a look at the positives for Gonzaga this year. For those who are joining the show because you're a Georgia fan or a Houston fan, you want to hear about Gonzaga, welcome. For those of you who have been watching the team all year long, maybe are skeptical or concerned about the situation with Georgia being on the 9 line, with Gonzaga getting an 8 seed, which I know many of us felt they deserved a 7 or potentially even a 6 seed. There was a lot of teams that were questionably seeded in the NCAA tournament. I thought Louisville as an 8 was a little shocking. Memphis as a 5, shocking for the other reason. But for Gonzaga, this is a team that we've seen when they play at their best, which unfortunately for Gonzaga was early November and late February, March, and kind of not most of the rest of the season. But when they play at their best, we know that this team is capable of beating anybody in the country, or at least the vast majority of teams in the country, capable of making a run to the Sweet 16, to the Elite 8, maybe at their absolute peak at the Final Four. Am I saying they're going to make the Final Four this year? No, not necessarily, but I am saying that at this team's peak, they are capable of making a run like that. They have the talent to do so. Here are the 4 things that I kind of have identified throughout this year of the reasons why I believe this team is capable of making that kind of run. Number 1, veteran experience and NCAA tournament familiarity. This team has a roster full of older players, of veterans, of guys who have been in the NCAA tournament before. Just looking at the 9 players in Gonzaga's rotation this season, one of them has already been in 4 NCAA tournaments. That would be Ben Gregg. Yes, Ben Gregg played very little in the first NCAA tournament. He wasn't even a rotation player. He was a high school senior, effectively, who was on Gonzaga's roster because of the COVID year. This was back in 2021 when Gonzaga went all the way to the national championship. He wasn't really a rotation player even in year 2, but at the end of the day, for the last 4 years, Ben Gregg has been at least on the roster, on the bench, or on the floor in the NCAA tournament. Nolan Hickman has been to 3 NCAA tournaments. This will be his 4th, while this will be Ben's 5th. Both Ryan Nembhard and Graham Ike have been to the NCAA tournament twice. Nembhard once with Creighton. Creighton made it both years that Nembhard was there, but he was injured in his first year. So it kind of counts as 3 for Nembhard. He was on that roster. He was on the bench. He was in the tournament. He just didn't actually get out onto the floor. And then, of course, they made that Elite 8 run, or Sweet 16 run. I think it was an Elite 8 run his sophomore year at Creighton. And then, of course, he was with Gonzaga last year. Graham Ike made the NCAA tournament in a play-in game when he was at Wyoming. So he's got 1 NCAA tournament game before he came to Gonzaga. And then, of course, was the starting center for Gonzaga during last year's NCAA tournament run. And then you have Braden Huff and Dusty Stromer, who both contributed to Gonzaga's Sweet 16 run last year. Now, the counter argument here is that Gonzaga's newcomers on the roster, none of them have NCAA tournament experience. Caleb Battle did not make the tournament at Arkansas, did not make the tournament at Butler in his freshman year, did not make the tournament in 3 years at Temple. So this will be his first time dancing. Very exciting for Caleb Battle, by the way, 6th-year senior. This is why he came to Gonzaga, was to get a chance to compete in the NCAA tournament. He will get to do that, but does not have that experience previously. Mike Ajayi only won D1 season, and it was at Pepperdine. So, of course, he has not experienced the NCAA tournament. And then Emmanuel Innocente began his college career at Tarleton State as a freshman again last year. He did not make the NCAA tournament. So a lot of experience from the returners for Gonzaga. Of course, Mark Few's been to the NCAA tournament for the last 25 plus years, but not a lot of experience for the new players joining Gonzaga. But I still think that having all of that experience is going to be a significant positive for the Zags. Key number 2, they have the best facilitator in college basketball. Like I said at the top, veteran experience, and in particular, veteran guards wins in March. It is a tried and true method. It doesn't mean that diaper dandies don't work, but in the modern college basketball era where teams are older and older because of that COVID eligibility, which is starting to kind of dwindle, and because the freshman classes up until this year were pretty weak, we saw a skewed towards older teams doing really well in March. But it's always been true, especially in the backcourt, that you want some vets. You want guys who've been around a little bit, who are more calm, controlled, collected. The Zags have that. They have that in Ryan Nembhard. He's a senior. He's been in the NCAA tournament a couple of times, and he is a calming, cool presence in the backcourt. Nolan Hickman as well, a guy who, again, has been in a ton of NCAA tournament, 2 senior guards. Caleb Battle is 6th-year senior, doesn't have that tournament experience, but is very experienced as a college basketball player overall. But the key is Nembhard. He's a matchup nightmare. And it's funny when you use that term and you talk about matchup nightmares, you're usually talking about somebody like Cooper Flagg, who's 6'8", and versatile in his position, or you're talking about like Danny Wolf, the 7-foot point guard at Michigan, basically, or Grant Nelson at Alabama. Those are kind of your matchup nightmares. A 6-foot point guard who's not known as a scorer typically doesn't tend to be called a matchup nightmare. But Nembhard is, because of how many different ways he can break you down. He can break you down off the pick and roll. He's a menace in transition. His floor vision is incredible. And if he needs to, he can score. He's not an elite scorer, but when teams have tried to dare him to score, he has been able to do that. He dropped 18 against San Francisco late in the season in a critical game for Gonzaga. He is able to make those things happen. And every team in this region who's looking at a potential matchup with Gonzaga, not just Georgia, but Houston's looking at it, even Clemson, Purdue, some of the other teams, they're looking at it too, because you have to figure out how to stop Ryan Nembhard. You have to figure out how to get the ball out of his hands, but not in a situation where he's getting the ball, to Graham Ike down on the block or getting it out to shooters. Like, you have to be able to have a game plan against Ryan Nembhard. If you don't, you're going to be in serious trouble. 325 assists on the season, a top 10 mark in terms of total assists in college basketball history, averaged 9.8 assists this year compared to just 2.3 turnovers, literally one of the best passers in the history of the sport. He is going to be a huge factor, positive or negative, for Gonzaga in this NCAA tournament. Number 3 for Gonzaga in terms of why they can make the Sweet 16, they have 2 dominant, highly efficient low post scorers in starting center Graham Ike, and until the game against St. Mary's in the WCC championship, backup center Braden Huff. I say until then because Braden Huff started in that championship game alongside Graham Ike the first time they had done that. An incredibly ballsy move by Coach Mark Few to change the starting lineup in a WCC championship game, but he did it. It worked. The two bigs for Gonzaga were stifling for St. Mary's. They couldn't handle guarding both of them. And I think this is the lineup. I'm really curious to see if they'll bring this out against Mike White and Georgia, a team that also has some size in the front court. Asa Newell, a huge problem for the Bulldogs, but they have other size as well. And I could see Gonzaga trying to go, whether they start Huff or not, I'm unsure, but I think they might play it. It's a limiting defensively, which is a bit of a concern, but offensively, both these players are so good when they get the ball in single coverage. They're also good enough passers that it's hard to double them, especially if the other one is on the floor. You can't really double from the big. You got to double from the wing. That gives Gonzaga open looks from 3. Not Gonzaga's greatest strength, but if those guards are willing to pass up the open shot, drive into the lane, get mid-range shots, try to get all the way to the rim, and especially in Caleb Battle's case, I think that presents a lot of problems for the opposing team. Most teams, not just like WCC teams, most teams, period, are going to really struggle to defend 2 capable bigs. And if they stagger their playing time like they typically do, that's still a problem for opposing teams. They have 40 full minutes of Gonzaga having a dominant low post offensive player on the floor. That's really, really tough for any team in college basketball. Number 4, our final kind of key for why Gonzaga could make a deep run this year, improved on-ball defense. For most of the season, Gonzaga hasn't been a great defensive team. I don't think that's a secret for anybody who's watched this team, who watched Santa Clara come to our house and drop 103 points at the Kennel. You know this isn't a great defensive team, but they've improved dramatically. The addition of Emmanuel Innocente into Gonzaga's rotation, briefly into the starting lineup and then just as a key rotation piece, has done wonders for this team overall. He is not a great offensive player, but I think having a player who's just a ball mover, who doesn't really look to score in the lineup, helps Gonzaga. It helped there weren't too many cooks in the kitchen, as it were, offensively, but mostly what Innocente brought was elite on-ball defense. He's right in your face. He navigates screens better than anybody on this team. He keeps opposing players in front of him. That allows Gonzaga it puts the pressure on the guards for the other team to have to try to get past Innocente, and if they're not able to do that, they can't put pressure on Gonzaga's bigs, who are foul prone and not great rim protectors. It doesn't allow them to kick it out to shooters as easily. Innocente's presence defensively has been huge. We've also seen improvement from Nolan Hickman in this area, improvement from Caleb Battle, who had 5 steals against St. Mary's. Georgia's not a great shooting team. I think if Gonzaga can pinch down low, prevent Asa Newell from getting his touches, and keep guards like Silas Demery in front of them, particularly with Innocente or Battle or potentially Dusty Stromer, who's quality in this area as well, that's a huge advantage for Gonzaga. And the fact that this area has improved so much over the last month or so of the season is a huge X factor for them getting into this tournament. So we know what the Zags do well. We also know some things maybe they don't do so well. And these are things that really could trip them up as early as Thursday afternoon in the NCAA tournament. We're going to talk about those coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, it's time to talk about the Armada Team of the Week, who is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts, that's myself and my co-host Isaac Shade, we're picking one team that stands apart from top-seeded stars to unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to force their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Florida Gators. The Gators, led by Walter Clayton, 17 points per game, just dominated in the SEC tournament, winning each game by at least 9 points. Not only did Florida grab the 4th 1 seed, but they are the nation's most efficient offense per KenPom. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what Florida has done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada Rogue or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Fabric. Folks, life moves fast, especially when you have a family. And one day you may be watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. And that's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You can be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, I want to make sure my family is financially protected no matter what happens, and Fabric gives me that peace of mind. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day, so protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we talked about what Gonzaga can do well, what Gonzaga is successful at, their veteran experience, elite guard play, 2 dominant low post players, improved on-ball defense, things that could allow Gonzaga to make another run. They've been to the Sweet 16 9 years in a row. Can they make it 10? They have the ability, even against a tough Georgia team in the SEC and a tough Houston team, presumably in the round of 32, the 1 seed. Gonzaga has things going for them that could allow them to potentially move to the Sweet 16, maybe even further if everything goes according to plan. However, there are plenty of things Gonzaga hasn't done well this year, things that could very easily trip them up. Again, not just in the round of 32, but against this Georgia team on Thursday afternoon. We got to start with the three-point shooting. This is the worst three-point shooting team in Mark Few's tenure as Gonzaga's head coach. One of the worst three-point shooting teams in Gonzaga basketball history, almost certainly. Before Mark Few, three-point shooting was just such a different animal. I'm sure there were teams that shot worse than 34.4% back in the 90s and 80s, but again, the volume of three-point shooting was just completely different. For all intents and purposes, this is basically the worst three-point shooting Gonzaga team of all time. 34.4%. 146th in the country, mind you, so slightly above the actual average in college basketball. Part of that is a testament to the fact that Gonzaga has historically been a very, very good three-point shooting team. You have your Adam Morrisons, your Kevin Pangoses, your Corey Kisperts, et cetera, et cetera. We know that this team has had shooters historically for a very long time, but they don't really this year. They have one. Nolan Hickman's a very good three-point shooter. He's one of the best shooters in the conference. He's one of the best volume, by volume and by percentage three-point shooters in the country. But the rest of this team is just not good in that area. The disappearing act for three of Gonzaga's front court players, the expectation was that Ben Gregg and Michael Ajayi, the two power forwards, would be plus three-point shooters. Gregg shot about 38% each of the last 2 years. Ajayi shot 47% at Pepperdine on a low volume. We didn't necessarily know that Ajayi would come in and be a great three-point shooter, but he has been very, very bad. Ben Gregg suddenly becoming significantly worse as a three-point shooter was entirely unexpected. Braden Huff was about 36% as a freshman. I think 34 actually. He's like 20% this year. Those guys just cratered as three-point shooters. Ryan Nembhard's been solid, but he's got a low-volume shooter. Caleb Battle's been about what Caleb Battle is, about 35%. Some games he's 0 of 5. Some games he's 4 of 5. You just don't ever really know what you're getting. Graham Ike has been decent, but it's not a big part of his game, nor should it be a big part of his game. Dusty Stromer completely disappeared as a three-point shooter late in the season, or the second half of the season, really. Emmanuel Innocente, that's not a part of his game either. So this team just doesn't have shooting. They just don't have it. When Caleb Battle's on and Nolan Hickman's on, that makes them much more dangerous. But the amount of games where both those guys have been shooting well, it just doesn't happen all that often. More often, neither of them are shooting well. And then you have games where Gonzaga goes 2 of 17 or 4 of 15 or whatever, where you just see some really poor three-point shooting games, and it has killed them many, many, many times throughout the year. Not having Steele Venters for a second year in a row was a killer. I don't know how many minutes he would have played. I don't know how that rotation would have shaken out. I don't know if Emmanuel Innocente would have redshirted. There's a lot of questions. What would have happened if Steele Venters was healthy? But this team would have been a better three-point shooting team. That is undeniable. And not having his presence hampered the team. Teams that don't shoot the three ball well typically don't do well in March. This is a huge problem for Gonzaga. Key number 2, something we've talked about all year long, rim protection. And it's funny, I don't think that Gonzaga's rim protection has actually been as big of an issue this year as maybe I thought that it would. When Gonzaga's had players go off against them, when they've had poor defensive performances, it's typically not because of their lack of rim protection. They've had some bigs who've had big games against them. Michael Ratai at Oregon State had a monster game against them in Corvallis. That was a problem for them. I'm sure there's other bigs who've had. Andrew Carr had a big game against them when they played Kentucky. But again, he wasn't dominating like right on the block. It was a lot of mid-post stuff from him. But I do think that Gonzaga's lack of rim protection, and particularly the foul-prone of both Graham Ike and Braden Huff, has impacted Gonzaga's defense in terms of how they defend the three-point line, because the guards are so focused on not letting penetration get towards the rim, because they know if Augustus Marcelonis is at the rim, or insert any guard, Silas Demery, LJ Cryer for future matchups here, that Gonzaga doesn't have a Chet Holmgren or a Brandon Clark to erase those shots. And more likely than not, Graham Ike or Braden Huff might pick up a foul. And if those guys are in foul trouble, it's curtains for Gonzaga offensively. So I think we've seen Gonzaga be so focused on eliminating penetration that they're willing to give up open three-point looks. That's how Santa Clara drills 18 threes in that game against Gonzaga in Spokane. That's how St. Mary's crushed Gonzaga in the first half of that game in Moraga. So while the direct lack of rim protection maybe doesn't feel like the biggest issue, it's the cause of Gonzaga's perimeter defense being suspect for large chunks of the year, which in turn allowed teams to shoot really well against them from three. When Gonzaga cleaned up their perimeter defense, when they shut down guys like Nate Calmise at Washington State, Malik Thomas at San Francisco, players like that, that's when Gonzaga got much improved. But it wasn't because the rim protection improved. Gonzaga just found ways to really eliminate those players' ability to get to the rim and test Gonzaga's rim protection. But teams in this tournament, they're going to figure it out. They're going to find that matchup. They're going to find ways to get downhill. And Gonzaga's lack of a shot blocker, an eraser, even just a shot alterer at the rim, feels like it's something that's going to be a significant problem for them if they don't find a way to course correct on that in the next couple of days. Number 3 for Gonzaga in terms of concerns would be contributions off the bench. And we already talked about Braden Huff quite a bit. And again, we don't know exactly. There's a possibility that they roll with that starting lineup that they had in that WCC championship game and have him go as a starter alongside Braden Huff. But he's been great offensively, not a great defensive player, but he's a good offensive player. He's not the problem. The problem is the rest of Gonzaga's bench. Michael Ajayi is wildly inconsistent. Was a all WCC player last year at Pepperdine, led the conference in scoring about 18 points, 10 rebounds per game, came to Gonzaga, was kind of thrust into a system that never really suited him. He never really found his rhythm. He did a little bit towards the end of the year, but it was because Gonzaga kind of stopped asking him to play the same role as Ben Gregg. I noted this earlier in the season. If you watch them now, it does not look like Ben Gregg and Michael Ajayi are playing the same position. Like they'll sub out for each other, and you wouldn't know that they're both supposed to be the four, because they're not asking Michael to do the same things that they're asking Ben to do, because when they did, he wasn't able to do it. That's been a problem for Gonzaga all year long. He's been better lately because he's been kind of a bit more free-flowing, asked a bit more to attack the rim and just do what he does comfortably. He's a good defender. He's a good rebounder, but he's not a great offensive player, and he's very inconsistent. Dusty Stromer completely vanished in the second half of the year, a huge problem for Gonzaga. He got replaced in the rotation by Emmanuel Innocente to the point where Stromer's not playing much. He's playing a few minutes a game, usually late in the first half, kind of like what Innocente was doing in the first half of the season. Innocente, as we said earlier, great defensive player, a non-factor on offense. So Gonzaga's just not getting the pressure on EK, Nembhard, and Battle to contribute offensively is significant. If Caleb Battle's not having a good offensive game, you just do not have enough weapons. Nembhard's not a great scorer. So in that case, you're relying heavily on Graham Ike and Braden Huff to do the huge amount of scoring. Ben Gregg, he can step up and score, but it's not really his role. Nolan Hickman's a shooter, but he's not really a go-to scorer type. So Gonzaga can get the offense can get a little stagnant and or one-dimensional, especially if Caleb Battle's not playing well, because there's not a lot of scoring coming off of that bench. And then number four, probably the most obvious one, Gonzaga's late game execution is horrendous. Now, they're a great free throw shooting team, which I didn't include in the first one because free throw shooting is incredibly important, but I kind of lump free throw shooting in with late game execution. And while Gonzaga's this is one of their better free throw shooting teams they've ever had, and one of the best in college basketball, their late game execution has been so bad this year. And that includes them missing clutch free throws. Ryan Nembhard missed clutch free throws against UCLA. We've seen the amount of times where Gonzaga needed to make free throws down the stretch and just weren't able to do it. It almost feels like their free throw shooting is not actually a positive for Gonzaga, despite the fact that on the season, they have been incredibly good in that area. But it hasn't just been free throw shooting. Shot selection at the end of games has been hideous. Both Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard chucked up shots, Nembhard against UCLA, Ike against St. Mary's, when they had plenty of time left on the shot clock. Horrendously ill-advised shots that if they'd gotten a better look, they might have been able to win those basketball games. So late game execution, shot selection, missed free throws, also emotional outbursts. This team has a temper, more than we've really seen from a Gonzaga team in the past. Sometimes it serves you well, more often than not this year, it has not served them well. Graham Ike getting a technical foul late in the game against Santa Clara cost them a chance to win that game. Ryan Nembhard getting a technical foul against St. Mary's was unbelievably frustrating to watch that happen. It was just kind of shocking to see that go down for the Zags. Like they have had Caleb Battle's had emotional outbursts at times that have cost them opportunities against Oregon State. In Corvallis, for example, like we've seen kind of a little bit of everything this year. Bad shot selection, missed free throws, defensive lapses, emotional outbursts. Anything you can do poorly down the stretch of a basketball game to cost you a chance to win, Gonzaga's done it. And the luck factor is definitely there. It's been addressed multiple times. Theo Lawson wrote a great article kind of coming into the NCAA tournament at the Spokesman Review, and he mentioned the luck factor and had some quotes from Mark Few about Ken Palm's luck rating and everything like that. But at the end of the day, when Gonzaga had opportunities to close the gap in these games that they lost, they didn't do them. They didn't do it. They missed open shots. They had lapses. They didn't get it done. If they do not execute well down the stretch, they will not advance far in the NCAA tournament. They may not win their first game. I don't think they're going to blow out Georgia. I think it's going to be a close game. And if Gonzaga does not execute down the stretch against Georgia, they will lose. This is a huge, crucial thing. And Gonzaga has been bad at it literally from the very beginning of the season. They managed to get an escape with the win over Arizona State, and I think the second game of the year. But for the most part, they haven't really won close games. It was a close game against St. Mary's in the WCC championship. So they their second game of the year and their last game of the year, pretty much the only close games this year that they've actually won. Been frustrating to say the very least. And if that's not cleaned up in the next couple of days, they will not be advancing very far in the big dance. Well, folks, we know the Gonzaga women's team did not make the NCAA tournament. However, Yvonne Ejim's incredible career is not over. She's got at least one more game. The Zags join the WBIT and will host UTSA on Thursday at the Kennel. We got more on that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility to connect by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. So whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes it hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you to a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent to grow your business today. The NCAA Tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA Tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're moving away from talking about Gonzaga's strengths and weaknesses as they get into the big dance to talk about, first of all, the Zag women's team and their new postseason, what they're going to do in the postseason, I guess, and then we're also going to talk about 2 WCC teams on the men's side who are going to participate in the NIT. We start with Lisa Fortier's team there in the WBIT, a new women's basketball tournament. And they're going to host UT San Antonio out of the American Athletic Conference. This game is Thursday, March 20th. It'll be at 6 p.m. Pacific time, and it will be on ESPN Plus for those who want to watch it. They kind of only really seed the top 4 teams because each region is eight teams. So there's 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, and they really only seed them so they can determine who's going to host. So Gonzaga was listed as a 4 seed, so they are hosting in Spokane at the McCarthy Athletic Center against the 5-seeded UT San Antonio Roadrunners. The winner will play the winner of the game between number 1 Colorado and number 8 Southeast Louisiana. Fun potential second round matchup there because former Gonzaga star guard Taylor Carr is an assistant coach at Colorado. So potentially if you get Gonzaga versus Colorado, you get a chance to go up against your former point guard from about a decade ago. But the Zags got a tough task to even get there because UT San Antonio was really, really good this year. Very surprising they didn't make the NCAA tournament. They cost themselves by not winning in the AAC tournament, but they went 26-4 this year. They went 17-1 in the American Athletic Conference, but they lost in the ACC tournament or AAC tournament, to Rice, and so they didn't get an at-large bid. The women's basketball side of things, I mean, it's tough on the men's side too, obviously, to get an at-large bid as a mid-major conference. You don't see it very often, but this 26-4 is a phenomenal record. 17-1 in the AAC. It's not as dominant of a conference as it is on the men's side, but that's a really rough season to not get into the big dance. Gonzaga. So for the record, while UTSA beat Rice in the regular season, they lost to them in the conference tournament. Gonzaga also played Rice this year, beat them in the regular season by 3. Both teams played Stanford in the regular season. Both teams lost to Stanford in the regular season. UTSA lost by not very many. Gonzaga lost by more than that. Let's just put it that way. That was a game that I think a lot of Gonzaga fans will want to forget. But the main thing that this sets up is we're not done watching Yvonne Ejim play basketball in a Gonzaga uniform. And that's pretty cool because we thought that we were. We thought that devastating missed tip-in on a great pass from Brice Allenbien in the closing seconds of the WCC semifinal game between Gonzaga and Oregon State, we thought that was it for Yvonne, and it was a tragic end for her career. She had a good look at it. She caught it, quick little tip-in. There was about 0.8 on the clock. Didn't go down. We saw tears in her eyes, and we thought that was it. But now she gets another opportunity alongside Sallenbien, alongside Taylor Dalton, alongside Maud Hybens, all of them, Esther Little as well. 5 seniors on this roster all get at least one more crack to play this UTSA team at home on Thursday again, 6 p.m. Gonzaga's men's team will play at 1:30, so you have a chance to watch both of these Zags teams playing on Thursday afternoon/evening. Hoping to see Lisa Fortier's team get a W here, potentially make a little run in the WBIT. Just some more opportunities to see the great Yvonne Ejim play basketball in a Gonzaga uniform. Looking over to the NIT on the men's side, we got a 1-seed San Francisco, 2-seed Santa Clara, both teams that throughout the year had kind of periphery bubble resumes, it always kind of felt like they needed to make at least the WCC tournament championship game. It always also felt like the really only way to be secure is if they actually win the WCC tournament or basically don't lose any other games. San Francisco's resume was better throughout the season because they didn't have a bunch of early season losses the way that Santa Clara did. But at the end of the day, Gonzaga wiped both these teams out of the bubble conversation by beating them on the road in the last week of the regular season. Santa Clara ends up losing to Pepperdine in the WCC tournament, which completely shut down their hopes, while Gonzaga took down San Francisco in the WCC tournament as well, to make it very clear that these two teams were not going to go dancing. Now, San Francisco, the Dons, the 1 seed, taking on 8-seeded Utah Valley in the NIT, so that means they will host. This game will be on Wednesday, the 20th, 8 p.m. Pacific time on ESPNU. Chance to face in the second round, if they beat Utah Valley, the Wolverines, they'll play either San Jose State out of the Mountain West or Loyola Chicago out of the A10. The rest of that region includes 2-seeded Stanford, 7-seeded CSUN, 3-seeded St. Bonaventure, and a 6-seeded Kent State. Meanwhile, for the Broncos, the 2-seed, they are taking on a 7-seeded UC Riverside team out of the Big West. This game is tonight for those of you listening to the show on Tuesday, 8 p.m. Pacific time on ESPNU. So again, if you want to watch some more WCC teams, you want to watch them primers, the North Carolina San Diego State games at 6 o'clock on Tuesday night and the play-in game. So if you're done with that game, tune in. Watch Santa Clara UC Riverside. It's going to be a fun game. Broncos hosting that one. The winner will play the winner of the 3-seeded St. Joseph versus 6-seeded UAB. 2 NBA players in that game, Rasheer Fleming for St. Joe's and Yaxel Lendeborg for UAB. Very, very fun matchup that'll happen there. And then the 1 seed in that region, UC Irvine, who was a snub for the NCAA tournament after losing to UC San Diego in the Big West Championship. They're taking on 8-seed Northern Colorado, while you also got 4-seeded Georgia Tech, Damon Stoudemire's team out of the ACC, taking on a 5-seed in Jacksonville State. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And thank you to those of you who've been everyday listeners throughout the entire season as we get close to wrapping it up here with Gonzaga's first NCAA tournament game coming up on Thursday. Check out the bracket breakdown if you have not done so yet. Myself, my co-host Isaac Shade from Locked On College Basketball, we're in Dallas on Sunday and Monday reacting to the Selection Sunday show, doing huge bracket breakdowns for every single region. It's on Amazon Fire TV. If you have one, plug it in. You'll see it on the front page. It's incredibly cool. Very exciting opportunity for the two of us. We're going to be in Dallas the next couple of weekends as well, continuing to do our live shows there. So check it out if you have not done so yet. But again, that is going to wrap it up for me today. We'll have a more comprehensive preview of the game against Georgia, specifically what the Bulldogs do well, don't do well, how Gonzaga can take it to this 9-seeded Georgia team and set up a matchup against Houston in the second round. All that coming up on Thursday's show. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.